Welcome to Ideas of India, where we examine the academic ideas that can propel India forward. My name is Shruti Rajagopalan, and I'm a senior research fellow at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. Today, my guest is Aditi Mittal, who is a comedian, writer, and actor based in Mumbai, India. She made her debut on the global stage with her first stand-up special, Things They Wouldn't Let Me Say, which is available on Netflix, and her second special, Girl Meets Mike, also on Netflix. And recently released her third show, Mother of Invention, on Amazon Prime, UK and Australia. She is also the host and executive producer of the podcast Women in Labour. She can be seen in the upcoming series The World According to Comedians in Finland on YLE. We spoke about her approach to comedy, her alter ego on stage, the logistical and the creative constraints on female comics in India, the insult comedy culture, and much more. For a full transcript of this conversation, including helpful links of all the references mentioned, click the link in the show notes or visit discoursemagazine.com. Hi, Aditi. Welcome to the show. This is such a pleasure, and I am just so thrilled to see you.
This is so exciting, Shruti. I am in complete disbelief that you have decided to lower the standards of Idea of India and have me on. I am absolutely thrilled.
So I can't believe you're starting this off with fishing for compliments, but if we must, let me give you some. This has been my funnest prep ever because I have a great excuse to watch and rewatch your videos. And there's a point at which my husband was saying, "You're watching that again?" Because I rarely do that with most comics. Like I didn't go back again and again. And I'm like, this is research. I'm doing prep. And what I'm really doing is just bursting into giggles. And he can't understand what's happening because typically I have my headphones on and it's just a giggle fest at home. So that's what I've been doing. So let's start with, this has been my all-time favorite prep. Thank you for that. So even before you say anything on the podcast, it's been a joy.
Oh, my pleasure, darling. My pleasure.
I want to start with one of my favorite sketches by you, okay? And I'm going to try and do this without giggling, but it's going to be hard. This is Dr. Lutchuke and the foot fetish. I want to break this down in a few parts. First of all, it's one of the funniest things I have ever seen. So, for those who haven't yet watched this bit, please go ahead and do it. Now, you've done stand-up comedy as Aditi Mittal, right? Very much your voice, your face, the way you normally dress. And you've also done sketch comedy with, solo and with others. But the Dr. Lutchuke sketch is something in the middle, right? Because it seems like a sketch. You show up in costume with a different accent and you're fully in character. But the jokes, the way, the timing, the landing of the jokes, it's all like stand-up. Except you never break character. So where did this crossover come from? What was the reason for it? What was the experiment?
I'm actually I'm quite a famous pervert in my family. And I've always, when I started doing stand-up, I wanted to do sex jokes. And I remember thinking that, oh my God, if I do sex jokes, then people will know I've had sex. And that, obviously, as we all know, I'm a virgin. And so I was terrified to go up with my own face and my own clothes and my own body and be like, so what's the deal with sex or whatever? And so then I saw this, and actually Dr. Mrs. Lutchuke, it's an anagram of the word chutkule, which means joke in Hindi. And it's based on my best friend's grandmother, who used to, after college, we used to go to her house. And then, she would advise us on all the matters that young girls from college should be advised on. And she was so funny and so ridiculous and so straight-faced. And so I was like, what? I have to do something, in sort of as a tribute to her. That's where Dr. Mrs. Lutchuke came. That's what I got the accent from there. I got the little posture from there. And I got the sari from Malad Station, which for 333 rupees at that point in time. And so, those are the origins of Dr. Mrs. Lutchuke.
I have questions about, can female comics talk about sex without, jeopardizing their marriage prospects and things like that? And this is like a peek into that world that I didn't anticipate. But before that, the sketch itself actually is pretty clean, in the sense that you're talking about a foot fetish and you keep saying, oh my God, I wanted to say sound like a pervert and make these sex jokes. It's a commentary more about like Indian families. It's a commentary about like how people go to temples and the things they worship. You even have bootlicking jokes in there. You have every kind of pun that you can make with feet. There's a critique of government and journalists. So initially I was thinking, oh my God, Aditi called this foot fetish so that it's clickbait. Actually, this is social and political commentary. It has very little to do with the actual fetish.
Yeah. I mean, I've had to specify sometimes on posters and on videos and stuff that this is not actual medical advice and this is not a real doctor. Because I've had, in fact, I remember when I first started doing Luchuke, and I used to do Luchuke back to back. So I would do Luchuke, then I would have a different act come on and do a little bit of like a 5-minute act. So I could go and change back into my clothes, right? And then I remember once after a show, the green room bathroom was broken. So as soon as the show got over, I was running away for my post-show pee. And as I'm washing my hands, I could hear somebody in the bathroom go, that girl was nice, that Aditi was nice, but that doctor was fantastic, huh? And I was like, now how to explain to people that it was me only. There was a time when I was doing a chat show with Dr. Mrs. Luchike. And so it's a sexologist on top. And kind of calls that the club got during that time was like just lots of people who are like, can we schedule an appointment with her? We just want to make sure like we are having these problems. And the club was like, no, she's not an actual sexologist. Like this is just a character she's playing. But, it also, ironically enough, yesterday I was listening to Nitin Pai's episode of IOI and he was talking about how misinformation and media literacy is one of the biggest malaises of our time. And it sort of hit me. I was like, oh yeah, those posters, it was so obvious that they're gag posters, but also, somebody assumed them to be real. And it really drove the point home for me when I was listening to that episode.
But you've touched on two things which are very unique to India. So the first is the ability to reach out to someone you think is an expert or someone who has at least had sex or may know something about it in a way that you cannot easily ask your parents. Now, you and I have grown up partly in the pre-internet age, and there were newspaper sexologist columns and, sort of the agony aunt advice, right? So there are a whole bunch of famous names there. Usually men, not many women out there. And for women, it would be in Graha Shobha or, Femina, like there would be sex advice, right? And a lot of them are basic questions which one would imagine you can ask other women in your cohort. But middle class India, there was a bit of a break, right? Urban middle class India, the nucleus family begins. You don't have the gaggle of aunties and grandmothers the way you have in the village. And now suddenly your source of information is gone and it's very awkward to ask your in-laws or male members of the family. So there's something structurally weirder going on in India when it comes to a sexologist. And you've just tapped into the funny of it, but it's funny that that's not the thing that people latched onto. Like it's real for them.
Yeah. The second show I did of Dr. Mrs. Luchike, a friend of mine managed to get Dr. Mahinder Vatsa, who is one of those.
Oh, fantastic. He's the famous sexologist.
Yeah. In fact, I did like an interview bit in a documentary film about him. I was mildly obsessed with Dr. Mahinder Vatsa as a kid. And, it's so strange that something like this used to appear in the newspaper because it was right next to the news. And so,
yes,
I remember being so terrified that while reading the newspaper, I would make sure that I turned that page sooner than the others, just in case somebody somewhere was watching me read the newspaper and they would see me, read sex advice. Just the paranoia is crazy. I don't understand what it is. And what I realized, by the way, India's sexually very conservative. We are the biggest perverts on WhatsApp, okay? There is the kind of messages, the kind of jokes that go around on WhatsApp. Let me tell you, apparently we know everything that we're talking about.
So, this is something interesting about Indian society, which is not apparent when we go to the malls and, or even like regular places, how segregated it is, right? Just in terms of conversation. Women, the conversations they have with other women are completely different from the conversations they have with men. The kinds of conversations you have within the family are completely different from the ones you have outside the family. In fact, forget conversation. You and I have gone, I think, to all girls schools, and I think you've even been to an all girls college. And girls will leave home in a particular outfit and reach college in a different outfit. They leave college in a particular outfit, the classroom, and then the jacket will come off and they're having coffee in the barista next to the college and on a date, and they look completely different. It's like Dr. Lutchike and Aditi Mittal. You can't recognize them. We have like some kind of multiple personalities that we need to inhabit. So now I can imagine that's great fodder for you as a comic. How hard is it to be a comic in that world where you have to segregate your content, where you can't make certain jokes in front of certain people?
Yeah, in fact, I realized that especially if you are, a short-heighted human woman in front of what are largely male audiences, you have to earn their attention in a completely different way than a guy with a mic.
Yeah.
You have to kind of either so you have to show them their place, for the lack of a better word, by being like cursing more or like roasting them more. And I think that dynamic, I wish, I was, and I think like there are more women doing comedy now. So there is a conversation among us where we're like, oh my God, did you notice this? Did you notice that? Lots of men who will come to us with advice. Listen, you should do this show. You should tell this joke. In fact, I was recently discussing with somebody, her partner's dad, does this jokey thing where he's constantly like, "Arey, this girl is a scam, yaar. She has never made me laugh. So, what comedy is she doing, yaar?" You want to be kind to the person and you want to be nice, but I'm just thinking they're like, buy a ticket. Buy a freaking ticket, okay? Let me come to where I work for me to do my work. I don't come to your dinner table and ask you to do my taxes, chartered accountant uncle. But for whatever reason, I'm supposed to be on 24/7 entertainment. I have to prove myself, after a decade of doing this job at your dinner table. Otherwise, I'm a scam.
So there are two things here, right? One is you have to always be switched on as a comic. Like people are always expecting you to make them laugh even when you're not working, right? But the other part of it is the flexing, right? So this is a typically male space. You have to show up. You have to make a couple of dick jokes or, say some swear words, or at the very least throw out the PMS thing. I know what all of you are thinking. Let me just put it out there. So now, the elephant in the room is just, a little bit more visible. We've addressed it. Now we can actually get to the real thing I want to talk about.
Yeah.
So I've seen female comics do versions of this.
We have to do, and this is a pattern I've noticed myself following, which I'm really dying to break really, is that you walk into a room, the first 2-3 jokes have to be self-effacing. Your first 2-3 jokes have to be like, oh no, me. I mean, I did it on this podcast. You know what I'm saying? I did it here when I walked in. I was like, you're not in the camera. You sort of, at least I was for a very long time, and I'm still trying to wean myself off that habit, is of, I walk in, I want to lower my status immediately so that I don't seem threatening to you. And so that in that moment, you're like, jhalli hai, she's just being silly. So that if I say something after that, that might be scandalous to you or controversial to you, that you're like, oh, no, but actually jhalli hai. So like, you've got that context on me.
So that, the jhalli hai part, so that's the non-threatening part.
Yeah.
Right? Like you want to immediately make yourself feel less threatening because you're like, oh, that's going to make me less of a target.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, is that because the audience is largely male, or is it because the audience might be mixed, but they are largely used to male comics and they're not used to female comics, and that's the real difference?
Yeah, I also think that, women laugh at the things that their husbands laugh at a lot more easily than the things that they would private. I mean, in India, women vote, for the parties that their husbands and fathers vote for. So they say, hey, wait, I read that. You're saying it's not true, or what?
Well, I mean, women inside a nucleus and joint family situation have to be non-confrontational, right?
Yeah.
And it seems like politics is like the, least benefit part in the confrontation. You might as well confront them about your public safety or your curfew hours or how many meals you have to cook. I mean, if you have to really get in a fight with your family and sort of push back, why would you do it about politics where it really doesn't matter and no one can find out the way you voted, right? So my sense is women are a lot more independent in their political thinking, but I don't know if they reveal it even to their own families. It's not clear to me. Like women overwhelmingly support prohibition in a way that men don't want prohibition in places like Bihar, right? So there do seem to be at least some specific margins on which women might vote differently and not tell the men that they're voting differently. I haven't run the data on this. I'm not an expert on this at all. I should ask some political scientists. I think Neelanjan Sirkar is the absolute expert on this question. So I should ask him at some point and maybe a link to something he's written, but that's my hunch.
Because, I mean, even like, in fact, ironically enough, I'm trying to do something about single women right now. And, one of the things that struck me, I was like, oh my God, by 2025, I mean, along with being the largest of every group, right, in India, largest number of diabetics, largest number of heart patients, we're also going to have the largest number of single women in the history of India.
Yes.
And what does that mean for us politically? I mean, will there ever be a party, and especially considering current conditions, will there ever be any movement towards, women voting for their own interests over the interests of, what they think their family wants them to do? I think I'm so interested to know.
Even though women are the largest group, they're sort of spread across all the constituencies, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like they form a critical mass. They're typically, the sex ratio is getting better, but you're typically, 980 to 1,000 in each district. It's fairly well spread out, right? So unless we have certain areas where there are a lot more single women, like certain cities, certain urban constituencies, I don't know if we will see like that outsized effect. But I do think as young women, especially move to cities, problems like, I don't know, typical issues like, cleaner streets, better public transport, better law and order, less molestation, those sorts of things are probably going to be at least talked about a little bit more, even if they are not the deal breaker when it comes to voting. But hopefully, just more part of the conversation. Like people talk about women in Delhi and their safety in a way that is not happening, in so many rural districts where women are getting raped inside their homes, right? So there's still a women's safety issue there, but it's not on top of anyone's list of things to talk about. But in urban areas, because of the single women, it is. So I think that's sort of, where that's my hunch. But tell me one thing about women's safety and single women. Is that a constraint for female comics in the sense that, all the shows tend to be later in the evening, right? Comedy is very much a late night after sunset affair. It's not like a bright middle of the day ladies who lunch kind of affair, right? And there are so many more restrictions on women after a certain time of day. There is a question of transportation. If they are women who live with their families, who's going to drop them, who's going to pick them up? I am almost 40 years old. And when I go back to India, my parents and the driver and someone or the other still chaperoning me everywhere in a very bizarre way. So is this one of the logistical constraints for female comics, or, it's there everywhere, but there are other problems female comics have, and that's why we don't have them in large number?
So, actually, except for Bombay, which I think is a largely safe city. And in Bombay, we have shows that we have midnight shows, and it is still, you can still do a spot at a midnight show. It gets over at 1:00 and then you take a rickshaw and you come home. And that's not as much of a problem. I think this also speaks to the kind of people that are doing stand-up comedy right now, is that a lot of the people doing stand-up comedy belong to, I say upper middle class, but what I mean is the 1%.
Rich.
So we have the money to be able to spend on a cab. We have the money to call an Uber. We have the money to, take private transport as opposed to, oh my God, now I have to wait for the train at 1 PM. So I think that is one thing that comes into play when we talk about this. In fact, when about 6 years ago, we did, I organized the first women stand-up open mic, and we called it Bras Before Bros. And we were desperately looking for sponsors at that point in time. And not because, this thing, but we wanted to partner with like an Uber. And I think Uber had just entered the market during that time. And we were reaching out to them desperately saying, hey, would you like to partner with us? We can have our contestants go back home, with this. And this is specifically for Delhi. It wasn't even for Mumbai, because Mumbai, we understood that people will come and go. But It was for Delhi. And Delhi, I think, is still one of those places where, we do shows in Gurgaon and stuff like that, where I rent a car in Delhi. I rent a car in Delhi because
Yeah, yeah.
I want to make sure that it's not me out on the road waiting for an Uber or looking for a rickshaw, even at 10:30 in the night. And that has been advised to me by everybody. So I think that,
Yes.
like Delhi, even Bangalore to a very large extent, you just want to make sure that your transportation is with you at all times. And and now it's a back of the mind thing. In fact, when I first started out, I remember I didn't have a manager or anything, but I used to do private gigs. God bless private gigs. And I got called to perform at someone's birthday party in Kolkata. And so then I jumped into and they sent me the ticket, and I had no concept of like, oh, you take advance payment and no. I was like, oh my God, you want me to come? Oh, he's giving me money. Show up immediately. I get to Kolkata airport and this person's phone is off. And then their phone is off the entire night. And so I had no idea because I assumed that they would come to the airport to pick me up. And or at least they had informed me that they would. So I get to Kolkata airport. I'm sitting at Kolkata airport and I'm wondering if I should call my mother because I said, no, if I call my mother and I say, Mummy, this had happened, she will never allow me to leave the city again.
Yeah.
And so I spent the night at Kolkata airport and they were very, very nice to me. But I think that is one incident that always comes to mind. And since that time, and I got a manager, I think within a year of that. So that was good. But, it always comes to mind whenever I think about the ability to travel, the ability to, be present in places where, the men won't have to think twice. Like lots of times, if we produce our own shows, right? So if I'm putting up my special, sometimes, you are a 50% partner on the production of the show. You end up spending more money for yourself in the hotel because you know that you can't stay, at a 2-star hotel in Nagpur because you want to make sure that
the latch won't latch.
Yeah. I mean,
these are things we learn when we do field work, which is that the fact that a door locks perfectly, that's a privilege. It's not a given in a lot of the lower end places, right? And I'm not even talking about, clean bathrooms and there was a spider. I'm just talking about the basics. I am not 100% sure if I have to jam the door with furniture.
Yeah. They usually put single women in room 101 because it's the one closest to the reception, right? So if in case anything goes wrong, you are like the closest to the reception. I guess also if something goes wrong, oh my God, you're closest to the reception. The things that come into play are really strange. I remember I think this was in maybe Delhi, is the first time it blew my mind. Somebody was coming to pick up. I was in a hotel room. I had a gig that night. Somebody was coming to pick up my costume and I was doing Lutchuke. So somebody was coming to pick up my costume and my props. Mm-hmm. And I told them, hey, listen, why don't you, and I was on another phone call. I said, why don't you come up to my room, take the stuff and then go. And they just did not allow this person to walk up to my room. And then they said, oh no, because there are brothel laws that a single woman cannot have a male person. I said, but there's no female on that team. I need someone to pick up these props. But that was that. So then I dragged the suitcase down and this thing. But, it's just really amazing in the randomest places where it pops up at you.
One is, the late night stuff, which is obviously disadvantageous for women unless they can privately, ensure their security. But the other part of it is just so much of the stand-up comics life is just traveling. And it's very hard to do if you're married, if you have children, if you live in a joint family, you have in-laws, you have weird hours, you're never home for dinner. So is this another layer that prevents women from coming in? Or even if they come in, is it a layer that prevents women from rising up once they are married? And they literally need to check out of that system in some way or have an extremely, supportive family that can provide the infrastructure for this to work.
Yeah, you are absolutely right about that. In fact, there are currently comics on the scene. One of them, she has a blanket rule that she is not allowed to talk about her husband. And her husband has just put that rule out there that you cannot bring up anything about me, anything about your mother-in-law, anything about the family. And she is still doing stand-up. But, this is sort of a blanket rule for her. And we used to wonder actually, she's been performing for a couple of years. And I just turned to her and I said, hey man, like, how come you don't talk about your husband at all? And she's like, oh, he doesn't like it very much. And I was like, oh, okay, that's fair. There's another one that I know of where she did a joke about her mother-in-law on stage, and her mother-in-law's friend somehow saw it. And now that girl doesn't do stand-up anymore because
Wow.
they said that this was not appropriate to go around, making jokes about your mother-in-law on stage. So there is sort of that, the natural censor comes one layer of that. And then I think also the second layer is that spaces are so hostile sometimes that you actively start distancing yourself from, some of the spaces because you're like, I mentally cannot handle this. I cannot mentally, it's more stressful to be in the green room than it is to be on stage sometimes because the dynamics are so dripping with testosterone or sometimes just actively hostile. And especially with, something like stand-up, it's not I'll say this, it's not a meritocracy. You know what I'm saying? It's, someone completely hilarious, but who is a woman who's in a room full of men, who are like, Are bandi nahi mili, or, engineering college mein, my friend is called Muttu, will obviously not kill as much as these men. And then at some point, the woman will just turn to herself and say, you know what? I'm not good enough and I should stop coming to these rooms. And so that becomes a natural thing that you sort of hinder yourself, or also you cut yourself off from spaces. It is the question of, being understood on stage. If you crack a sex joke means you love sex, right? If you crack a sex joke means you want to have sex with them. And then there is also a complete sort of lack of, when you're doing comedy, a lot of it is also confessional. You're vulnerable. There's a lot of boundaries that you sort of, breach of your own, not even somebody else's. You breach a lot of your own boundaries. The assumption is that if you are willing to do this on stage, then surely it'll be funny if I put my hand on your boob for a fan picture. And that becomes, and then if you make a fuss, then but this is a joke. Oh, you're okay with talking about sex all the time, but you can't take this as a joke. The dynamics of it are very, I don't want to end up.
This is actually so interesting that you said this, because my perception was that, when women talk about sex on stage, it's that they'll be judged more. People will think, oh, she's a slut. Of course she's had sex. And she seems like she has had sex with many people and she's cool talking about it. But I didn't realize that it's not the judgment or perception alone. The moment you open that door, they think you're available to them in that moment. It's not a judgment thing. It is now you have switched yourself from the role of a good, decent person to someone who is available. In fact, it's the same thing that happens to dancers on stage, right?
Yeah.
They do all these very raunchy moves. They're obviously playing a part of a dancer on stage. And people will grope them because they're like, oh, if she's willing to do this, then she's obviously opened up that door and she's showing her midriff and she's, like sort of shaking her hips and she must be available and I should be allowed to grope her. And I had no sense that happens to comics. Do they grope female comics when they come for pictures, like even in Bombay or Delhi or maybe even in Gurgaon?
Not in the cities.
Dalrymple's Anarchy.
Not in the cities. Not in the cities. And not, I mean, the incident that I spoke about actually happened in 2015 in Lucknow.
Okay.
I don't think it happens as much anymore. I do think that there is a sort of, like, even when you do a roast, right? The kind of stuff that people think is okay to say to you suddenly blows your mind. And you're like, oh my God, I made, this is my fault for opening that door. Lots of comics abroad. Like I was talking to, I hung out with Whitney Cummings, just today in my life. I hung out with Whitney Cummings and she was like,
you're funnier. I'm sorry.
It was like, I don't do roasts anymore. And, and it's a global problem is where once you put yourself out there in that way, that people think that the door is permanently open and they have the right to turn around and treat you in that way as well.
So, I wanted to talk to you about the roast. I mean, this is in particular the AIB roast that you did, which is, I think, the most salient in my memory, but also more generally in India. Even outside of roasts, why is insult comedy so big in India? I mean, Kapil Sharma show, which is supposed to be this family friendly thing. It's actually playing on a general network television channel. It's full of insults and it's, everyone. It's like fat people jokes and, the third gender. It's every, men who are effeminate, the women who are unmarried. Insult comedy just seems to be the way people do comedy, like some kind of lowest common denominator in comedy. So what is going on in India in insult comedy?
Life in India is cruel. I mean, if you turn around and look at, you get some distance from the life that you're leading here, you realize, I mean, the state has seemingly abandoned you. You have to sort of, you're doing this stressful commute to work every day. You're working for a boss that doesn't really care for you a whole lot. You come back home and, the world around you has told you that, your wife is either a gold digger or that, you're not being served as a man enough. Your, kids now require a much more expensive education than you required when you were younger. Your grandparents are aging and you have to pay for their private hospitalization. Life is difficult. And I think that the cruelty of life is very much, actually, let me frame this better. I think when you live in a cruel world, you laugh at crueler things. I think that's what it really is. And so, if the colorist jokes, the, misogynist jokes on Kapil Sharma. In fact, somebody's telling me like, oh my God, why don't they have more women on Kapil Sharma show? Thank God they don't have, too many women on Kapil Sharma show because they will have these dudes dressed as women, right? Thank God. Okay. Because if they were treating women the way they treat these dudes dressed as women, where like a kick in the ass is a punchline. You laugh because it's a dude in a dress getting kicked in the ass. But if it was actually happening to a woman, it would not be funny at all. I mean, though I don't know.
I hope so.
From the way we're going currently. So I think it's a function of just our daily life being cruel. I think it is a function of...
So we're just desensitized, basically.
Yes.
Just lack empathy for that reason.
Yes.
But why are certain groups targets? Why aren't we making the jokes against the municipal commissioner or, dysfunctional government or bad politicians? I find Kapil Sharma himself very funny. I think he's got great humor, great timing. But the rest of the show, most of the jokes for me, they're just not something that I find funny. So why is it that it's always certain groups and certain targets, especially unmarried women? Or women who are considered truish.
Threatening.
What is that?
Threatening.
It's threatening.
It's threatening because here's a woman who sort of doesn't have anywhere to be. You can't shame her into any hole. You can't shame her. Why aren't you at home right now cooking for your husband? Why aren't you, taking care of your mother-in-law? Why aren't you? Here's a human single woman who cannot be shamed. And that is a threat. That is an open threat. And that is a straight up offense to people. Where they're like, nahin, shadi kar lo, because they know that it'll basically give them premises to punch down on you. One, you're bound in the various ways that society binds women. And I think, and I'm so glad you said that because I love Kapil Sharma. I do love Kapil Sharma individually. He is an absolute delight.
He's hilarious.
Even his story is so fantastic and it's so heartfelt. I watched a special on Netflix, which I loved. Okay.
Yeah.
It was so heartfelt and so lovely. I mean, those jokes about, the fat women and the unmarried women and the desperate women, it works. It is conventionally what works. I mean, if you make a joke about a 55-year-old uncle whose sweat patches, are his entire shirt, it will offend people. It will offend people. Everyone will be like, how can you talk about your father like that? How can you talk about your mother like that? And we have a weird fetish with power, I have realized as a people.
Yeah.
And that comes from our also inherent need to keep like the hegemony or just sort of like to bow down to the hegemony at all times. Right? I mean, why? How can Mein Kampf is the best-selling book in India? Explain to me. If we don't have a fetish for like unfettered power, irrespective of the morality around it, how is Mein Kampf the best-selling book in India?
Not just in English, in like so many languages. It's been translated into so many languages. It's a little bit freaky. But so coming to the insult comedy part. So for instance, when you did the roast, you were a target because, all the women, the unmarried women jokes, that was going on. Then there were all the jokes about Tanmay Bhatt being fat. By the time the third person came on, it's like, I can't handle one more fat joke about this guy because this is now embarrassing. I mean, you got to give me something of higher quality, right? The first time you might chuckle if you hadn't noticed that a person was on the larger side. Okay, maybe a chuckle bursts out of you. But past the point, it's not even about being woke or politically correct. It's just not something that's going to make me laugh. And Tanmay Bhatt has talked about how much he has been trolled for his weight, which is just, it's just depressing because he's so funny, right? Ashish Shakya, everyone was just talking about how he's down, right? So that was the theme. And of course, all the gay jokes about Karan Johar who was there. So even in that group, it is not, Khamba is so tall. It's not about the tall person. It's not about the single man. Even in the men, there are these very particular people where they are targets. So is that because comedy makes them more of a target and more vulnerable? Or is it just we are like this as a society? We say, "E mote, e takle."
Yes.
We just call people by their body parts, literally.
Yes. Oh, we do. So, Miss, actually, to be very honest with you and to give you what I think, this was about now nearly 10 years ago. I would like to say that our humor, I think my personal humor has evolved from that time. We were also, sort of leaning into the roast part of it. And I think it was also very inspired by the American format of roast.
Yeah, format.
Where it's just like, fat, ugly, stupid, too many people you've slept with. We sort of leaned into that. And I did not anticipate that would become the thing that people would identify me with for a very long time. I did not.
I don't identify you with that.
Thank God.
Honestly. Yeah, no, and that makes sense because, the insult comedy which is happening on stage, it's not like that's not going to continue to the green room or in the workshops when you're actually discussing what tone to take or what kind of jokes are going to be made. It just kind of, if you're part of that group or that particular, set on that particular day, you can't exactly say, you know what, I'm just going to go do my thing and leave and keep myself away from the rest of it. You are part of it. And if you do keep yourself away from the rest of it, then you're not professional, right?
Yeah.
You don't come to the workshop. You're not helping people bounce their ideas. So it's a bit, I can see how this starts getting into the actual, what's your network? Who are you hanging with? Who are you bouncing your ideas with? Who are you writing with?
Comedy is not exactly a meritocracy, right? It is a lot of power play. It is a lot of one day suddenly somebody will get famous, and those dynamics come into play in green rooms. When you're out there being pitched to people, suddenly it's like, oh no, this person said they don't want to work with that person because now they're insecure of that person. That happens a lot. Lot, and it is, and that's why I can see more and more women, who are either like, we'll go do our own thing. And a lot of women have gone and done their own thing and done it really, really well. But I do think that the mainstream spaces shut down to women, or women start excluding themselves from the mainstream spaces after a while.
I want to refer to one of the first bits that I saw of yours on YouTube, and I started subscribing and following that day. That was the moment for me. I knew about you before that, but this is the bra bit, right? This is Biju in that little shop. First of all, you and I grew up again, mostly pre-liberalized India, where all the shops, they're not bra stores or lingerie stores. They are hosiery stores that sell everything from men's underwear and women's petticoats to, all sorts of things, right? And now this is also the place where you go to buy your first bra. It's always run by a man, and it's always the stock boy is a boy, not that much older than you. This is the Biju character.
Can I tell you, by the way, so I asked around while I was doing my research for that. I asked around, I said, hey, why is there always a guy at the shop? And now I don't know how far to believe this, but they said to me, oh, it's because women are really impatient with each other. And so that's why we have men. And I'm like, or is it just that you guys are a bunch of pervs who just want to hang around and scope out women's tits? You'll never know. It's
the same thing you were telling me about the boundary issue. If a woman is talking about the mechanics of a bra, then men are going to come and line up and kind of stare at her and ask her to do the bit and all that stuff, right? And pretend like they're buying it for their girlfriend or their wife, whereas all they want to do is just stand and stare at a woman talking about boobs.
Yeah.
And you can't be unprofessional and not be selling things well. So the only women I've ever seen in these stores is the lady, like, typically the wife or the mother of the proprietor, who's sitting at the billing counter, kind of making sure that the stock boys are not being pervy or something. Like, does that make sense?
That makes so much sense. The other day, Kajol said something hilarious. Okay. As usual, she made some tweet and then, 40 uncles lined up underneath. Excuse me, you female comedians only boobs, bras and panties. And then Kajol just like,
Regine.
Yeah. Kajol said, I'm convinced that uncles only line up to lecture female comedians about what to talk about because they want the thrill that somebody is like reading their words of sex and bra and boobs and all. That is the sort of sexual thrill to them.
That's the titillation.
And I'm like 200% it. He's like, I wrote sex, boobs,
yeah,
and
so
bra.
But for me, the most incredible thing was I sent it to all my friends. I mean, I went to an all-girls school, so all my close friends from childhood are all women. They all saw it. They're like, oh my God, we've had the identical experience buying our first trainer bra or whatever, right? So all of us have had this uniform experience. And now I'm thinking about it. This was pretty early in your career. Now, if you try and workshop this or try and sort of land some of this in a green room with a bunch of men, no one's going to find it funny. And basically, you're going to think it's not funny, whereas it is hilarious. And it is the lived reality and experience of so many of us. So that seems to be another sort of problem, right?
That particular set, in fact, I remember writing it. And then I remember I was backstage. I was hosting that day and I was backstage and somebody else was recording their set that day. And I said, hey, can I jump in on that recording? So I'll split the cost with you. Let me do this set. And I remember I was sitting there and I was practicing it. And there was Deep Chabria. Deep there was one of them, he's an advertising guy. And he was listening to me do it. And he's like, oh, no, I get that. Like, I see that. And I think, oh yeah, only an advertising person would be able to see it because he's worked on like lingerie accounts before. So he was like, oh yeah, no. And I was like, well, maybe that's what we have in common. Somebody trying to sell bras and somebody talking about bras.
It's also like the male-female spaces, right? Like even if it's a particularly sensitive man, in the teenage years, I don't think most families take the brother along with the sister when the sister's going to buy a training bra. I mean, there is just a segregation within families. There's a segregation on everything. It's not the American way where you go to the mall and the boys are doing something on the side and the mother and the daughter will probably go into one of the lingerie stores and get fitted for a bra. So everything in India culturally is designed in a particular way. And now we have this expectation that suddenly, because we're in a comedy, theater or in a stand-up gig, all of this has to suddenly crumble and disappear. And it just doesn't happen. Right. And then that becomes visible in the structure of comedy. At least that's what I've been trying to make sense of it. Otherwise, it makes no sense to me. Women are so funny in India. Our mothers and grandmothers are hilarious, right? No one knows they're hilarious. They don't even tell these jokes in front of the men. They don't tell these jokes in front of their sons, their brothers. So that to me is interesting.
The secret life of women, I think, is one of the most, to me, it is the most exciting thing. I mean, why do you think we're running off into, restrooms together, at dinners to powder our noses together? Because we're discussing what's happening at the table and passing snarky comments while refreshing our lipstick. Even in the Great Indian Kitchen where you see, the mother, the daughter, the aunt, the grandmother, everybody gathers in the kitchen to pass comments at how, Chachaji's had too much to drink. And, oh God, they're laughing at anything. Now, oh my God, one of them is going to start singing. Oh, I hope they don't bring up Kishore Kumar and, ruin his legacy. I think that those private spaces are, I think of endless fascination to me. And including say a girls' school, or a girls' college, both of which I went to. I'm telling somebody this. I realized I would not be doing comedy if I had not gone to a girls' school because the natural shut-ups that come to you when you are when you're in a co-ed space, when you've got men as well, but they're like, that's not cute. You stop wanting to be cute because you're not catering to that gaze. So you're just a straight up joker.
Yeah.
like, I once threw up in my own face, and it was one of those things where, like, I was the head girl that too. And we were on the school bus.
I love it.
We were on the school bus, and I'm shouting at everybody. Like, I'm having this whole scene where I'm like asserting my power at these young, helpless ninth and eighth standard kids. Okay. I'm like, I'll punish you. Yay, wo. Suddenly bus jokes. I was feeling nauseous anyway. I raise my hands to my mouth to stop myself from throwing up, but I don't get there in time. So I'm like at this much of a distance, but due to the force of the throw up, it like hit my palm and then bounces back on my face. And the whole bus is laughing hysterically. Okay. I am head girl, utterly humiliated. After that, I got called Neville Longbottom for the rest of the year.
He grows into the hero.
Right?
So, I mean,
He grows up.
yeah, book 7 is his moment. He's playing the long game and he grows up hot.
A lot crueler if I was being judged in a mixed gender environment. I know that it would be a lot crueler.
When you start doing this as a career, how do you figure out that segregated space? Can it happen through Instagram? Because now women can kind of watch it in private and laugh and then hopefully come to your show, or, get you like a very outsized platform so that, corporates and, sponsors come to you and they are willing to collaborate with you on various things. Because at the end of the day, you have to make money.
Yeah.
And if women are only laughing in private and segregated spaces and they're not going to pay for the ticket and put the bum on the seat, what is the way out?
Sorry, I didn't mean to imply that women are only laughing in segregated spaces.
Sorry, that's my bad.
No. I do think that, women are laughing. More than ever, women are laughing now. I do think we still have a very, very long way to go. But I do know that women are laughing more than ever. In fact, I think 80% of my career, March is my hot month for work because it's Women's Day, and that's when everyone like wakes up and realizes women exist or whatever. And so then I'll get a bunch of work. And my favorite story about this was I was doing a show for, the First Lady of the Indian Army was visiting the Kolaba camp. So I got called in to do a show for the ladies of the Indian Army, all stationed in Kolaba. And I was very excited. And I go to this show. And I mean, everyone is dressed to the nines. Okay. And this is a show at 11 in the evening. 11 in the afternoon. So I go inside. I start doing the show. The show goes okay, like to the point that I don't hear too many laughs and the audience is in the dark, right? I don't hear too many laughs. But I do hear a lot of like tinkling of, people's jewelry and stuff like that. And I'm like, I walk out of the show and I'm like, I need to, beeline out of here. As I'm beelining out of here, suddenly, Mrs. Singh, but then First Lady of the Indian Army, she calls me. She's like, "Beta, come here. You must have lunch with us." And I was like, "Really?" She's like, "Oh my God, that was so funny." And I noticed that she has like, black, like a line of black mascara. And I was like, "Really?" Like, she's like, I said, I was like, I was so worried that, you were not enjoying it. And she's like, "Of course we were enjoying it." And then I realized they were all laughing like silently, but their jewelry was shaking. And that was the tinkling that I was hearing through the show. But a lot of the stuff, they're like, "Oh my God, we can't laugh at this. We can't laugh at this. It's inappropriate to laugh out loud." But I that's my favorite story. And then I had like lunch with them, got a bunch of pictures. It was very cool.
So in this, what is the way out of this in terms of like a career path, right? I mean, you can't just obviously work in the month of March, and I know you're way busier than that. So it's hard to find time with you is how busy you are in the month of May and
thank
June.
God.
And this, yeah, it's not like, oh, this is summer and that's mango month. You're just busy, right?
Yeah.
So other than March. So it's one thing to say, yeah, maybe you get booked in certain spaces because you're the female comic, but more generally, what is the career forward? Is it to do a lot more stuff online? Is it to gather a very large audience that doesn't necessarily have to laugh out loud in public but they have money backing them and they have eyeballs and they have a phone? How do you think about that audience, your own audience?
Yeah, I fancy myself an intellectual. I believe that I have too much to say and it is not confined anymore, I think. Because I think for a very long time, I was figuring out my space as a woman. And my every experience was filtered through that. I think, and that's a function of growing up. For the longest time, I think I filtered a lot of my life experiences through only the lens of being a woman. And I think it is actually necessary. And I hope to God for the next 10 generations of, stand-up comedy and stand-up comics, they will continue to filter their life experiences through the lens of like solely being a woman, because there are so many millions of experiences that we are having as women that are sort of unspoken, and unsaid, and that need to be said out loud in the world just to confirm that I'm not crazy and we're all having this universal experience of being a woman in India today. I do imagine that I am, I try to educate myself on a daily basis. I try to challenge myself personally a lot. And I think that is what has served me in the longer run, is to constantly challenge myself on a personal level. And I think that's why like now people, I'm doing something. I don't know if I should say this yet, but it's not, I work with Financial Times a lot for like the UK newspaper. I'm doing a piece for them right now. I write columns on the side, where we're constantly in, writing scripts for something, writing ad campaigns for something. Yeah. The idea is that there is also the angle of, the understanding of group psychology or having an audience, right? When you're talking to a group of people, when you sometimes either say exactly what they want to hear or you say something that delights them so much that they laugh collectively. That I think is a very valuable skill that can be transferred to, various spaces and places. And that is currently where I'm making a bit of an earning as well.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and
no, and it's so hard to write, and to write well. Comedic writing is a whole other level of difficult, but just to write anything well is difficult. Yeah. So the ability to be able to do that without that audience feedback, it's incredible that you can do both.
Yeah. Yeah. Also don't know how to do anything else. Like I was at a corporate job for like 20 minutes. I got fired because I got caught making an Excel sheet for every time that I took a poop in office. Because then I would calculate how much time I had spent in the week for taking a poop in the office and then be like, oh my God, I got paid for taking a poop. And so that I shared it with.
What was the job?
I was with a New York based company, and that's all I would.
I love this because this is. I love the potty jokes and the foot fetish and the sexual. The door is now opening. This is thrilling me no end.
Yeah, I imagine. I find it absolutely ridiculous when people are like, "Oh, don't be sexual. Don't talk about shit. Don't talk about this." What are you ignoring? Like, what is wrong with you? You're acting like people don't shit. Like, that's so weird to me. Just the prudishness with which people, how come you're like using curse words? I was like, oh my God, we're serious. Like, what world are you living in where people are not using curse words? Yeah, and I believe, all this propriety and like, oh my God, use fancy language and, I don't know, give us an analogy.
Be proper.
Yeah, give us an analogy for every time you go take a dump. Like, I really do think that is sort of, it's a way to keep people down. It's a way to keep people down constantly, to be like, oh no, you're talking about shit, therefore I will not listen to anything else you have to say. There's a classic thing where you have a problem and you're telling it to someone and then they're like, well, I don't like your tone. Girl, it's not about my tone. Listen to what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I think I think this whole insistence on propriety is a tool of oppression. I do think that. And I'm not uneducated by any chance. I mean, even if I was, that's not the point. Is that I know my language. I think I'm fairly eloquent as far as my English is concerned. I think I'm fairly communicative as far as my Hindi is concerned, but I will use curse words. How about that? I will. I will because it scandalizes you. And I will because it makes you feel like, oh no, what is this happening? I will use them.
No, and also sometimes I think I just use them as punctuation.
Yeah.
when I can't find the right word. These are my Amit Verma in his writing class tells me don't use adjectives and adverbs and that. I'm like, yeah, I'm using swear words instead of all of these things. No, but you're right. It still scandalizes people in India when you swear, and then you must be a particular kind of girl, right? So I think that's the connotation that keeps coming back. There is a template for a good girl.
Yeah.
And, it's always the girl who cooks, gets married to the right guy at the right time and knows how to knit. Let's not forget the knitting and the cooking and the cleaning.
Yoga.
Oh my God. Yeah, so it's a particular type. And the kind who doesn't open her mouth and doesn't laugh out loud. Right? It's all of those things. Like, basically what they're saying is you shouldn't take up too much space. Now, the loud laughing is part of taking up too much space. The cursing and calling attention to yourself is taking up too much space. So it's all of those things, right? And now comics by their very nature are taking up too much space. I mean, you're the only person with the mic in the room. Yeah. So that I can imagine now is a whole problem.
It bothers people a lot. And I am absolutely thrilled about it.
Are you constantly told that you are not an eligible marriage match anymore because who's going to marry someone with a potty mouth, who swears, who's on stage, and who will make fun of members of the family and not be proper and travel? Like, is this a thing that you're constantly told? I'll tell you why I ask, because when I was doing my PhD, even the most well-meaning people, like all these random aunts, and by the way, I was doing my PhD in economics. I wasn't sort of gallivanting around the world and hang out in a brothel or something. They were like, oh my God, who will marry you if you are this, qualified? Because I already had a law degree. Yeah. And the assumption is that whoever I marry has to have more degrees than me, which is kind of hard. So that was the thing they used to keep telling me. So do people keep telling you, like, who's going to marry you if you're doing, if you have this job in this particular life?
First of all, you are like so fucking cool. Like, this is my time to gush. Give me a second. Like, your degrees, whatever, right? But Shruti have not seen me. Like, every conversation that I hear with you in it, every fucking tweet of yours, everything you say is so fantastic. And I am so, like, obsessed with your work. And I mean, more honestly, some dude with 40 more degrees than you, it cannot be you. I'm so sorry.
Oh, thank you. No, but I did find the most incredible guy who has absolutely no qualms about being married to me despite not having more degrees than me. And so on. And so that worked out well for me. But how is that for you? Is it harder to date? Is it harder to persuade members of the family that, dude, I can get married. This is not going to be an issue. Whoever I choose to marry will work this out. Like, what is that zone for you?
So, I realized again in the dating space also, then it becomes power play immediately, right? It's immediately like, wow. Oh, I will come and tell you a joke. And you're like, man, it's like, I'm drunk at 11:30. Go away. Like, if you want to start a conversation, sure. But, they're like, it's that same ethos of, in the garden, in the playground when you're a baby. And the boy who really likes you will come and pull your pigtail and then run away. That is literally what most flirting is like, that I have experienced at least, where they'll be like, I'll come and one up you. And I'm like, yeah, just go away. I want to talk to my friends and hang out. And there is also, I think, the general intimidation of somebody who, has a mic in their hands for work. And there's that thing where you have more power, or at least the impression that you have more power than them. And they immediately want to assert themselves so that, that who's boss, kind of a thing. Right. And I think that, even any woman that owns her power, any woman that's not going to, take too much shit, I think it's tough dating. I think it's just that's a general sentiment going around, that it's tough to date when you're a self-contained and self-owned human woman. When I was it was actually in 2013, when I just started doing stand-up, and, one side of my family was a little bit obsessive about me getting married. They said, why don't you get married first, and I got to do my first show in London. Okay. And somebody, this one relative calls me and they're like, we want to hang out with you and everything. And I call my dad and I'm like, should I go? And my dad's like, but just go for one dinner and come back. Okay. So I go for one dinner, and at the dinner, they're like, you're doing so fabulously. You can't believe that, somebody paid for you to come all the way here and talk rubbish. And all. I'm like, yes. Then they called me again. They're like, oh, and I was leaving, I was going to be in London for 3 weeks. They said, oh, we're having another dinner. Why don't you come over? So I went to the second dinner. Then for the second dinner, there's this guy who is like 70% jawline. Okay. He was, and like his jawline could cut glass. He was an ear, nose, throat, monkey, donkey, buffalo, cow, any animal, squirrel, surgeon. Okay. He was a surgeon. He was making something called tapas. Okay. And, it's all very grand. And he's very like making eyes at me. And at first, I didn't get it at first. And then, my uncle's like, "Arey surprise, beta, you must talk to him. He's rich." So I was like, okay, and I fact that this is a person we're having, and it's all very fancy. Like you think about the context, we're on a balcony in like in a house, in just outside of London. It's all, we're drinking like what is the finest wine. And then while we're drinking it, he's made tapas, not to forget. And then his jawline suddenly is like, so, and we're talking about sort of our romantic liaisons. Now he's expressed interest. I've been like, well, you're attractive and I'm drunk. He goes, so do you intend to continue this after you get married? I was like, "Nahi, wine ka nasha gone to waste, okay." I was like, oh, I don't know what I mumbled. I can't remember specifically what I mumbled, but I think I must have been like, oh yeah, I think I said, oh, I have to make money, don't I? And he's like, oh, but once you're part of the family, I don't think mom will like you doing it too much. And I was like, "मैं तेरे से ढंग से नहीं मिली. Now I have to cater to your mother.
Yeah.
What is happening here?" And so then I ended up having sort of like a longish chat with that uncle of mine. I think I've made it amply clear. And I told them that the next time you do this to me, if you ambush me with a guy and all, I'll start telling them I'm a sex worker and that, like, yeah, that I'm like, Anil Kapoor's nipple tweaker in Bollywood and all. Like, so they were like, you can't say all that. You know how badly it reflects on the family. I was like, that's not my problem.
So when you do shows in London, so one thing I've noticed, which is very interesting about you, I've heard Indian stand-up comics who largely do their sets in English, a little bit of Hindi or English thrown in. When they are abroad, they usually fall in one of two categories, right? So either they are doing gigs in front of a completely desi crowd, right? They are talking exactly the way they would in India, except this is a group that's richer and they've paid in dollars. It's really the only difference.
Oh my God, that's really good.
But you know what I mean, right? Everything kind of like that's what they're doing. Or they are speaking to largely an American, sprinkled in with an Indian American audience. These are typically like the smaller clubs in New York. And most of them basically change the way they speak, like they change the accent, the rhythm. So of course the content of the jokes has to change a little bit because the context has to be built. But I've always laughed less in those sets because I feel like the timing is off. And somehow you've managed to figure that out. I don't know how you've done it. I've heard the bits you've done in Australia, like, all this stuff is up on YouTube. And you are speaking a little bit more slowly than you do in India. You enunciate a little bit more, but somehow your timing has not gone off. So what is the secret sauce to this?
Thank you for noticing that. Thank you. Wow. I've been specifically trying actually. And Jen, that's now I realize there are two things, right? One, you can go the Vedas way, where you're like, I'm talking to a global audience. I'm a global comedian. And therefore the globe is my globe. Yeah, I am from Mumbai. these are my dogs.
Yeah.
My mother is smoking in the next room, which she really should not be. And I think that, I'm very keen on when I go abroad to lean into who I am at home and take that version of me there, as opposed to go there and then just say the things that people want to hear. I feel like that will also sound disingenuous. I don't know fancy things about, the larger world where you say Trump 3 times and people will laugh. I don't know those things. What I know best is where I come from and the things and those are the things I promise you I can be funny and I can, talk about them. And I would love for you to come on my personal journey when I'm on stage. I think that's what that'll make me irreplaceable is what I think. Is that okay? When she comes with this really, she's got a very unique story that is solely hers. Then it's not that, oh, any comic can come and do these generic 5 jokes, about spices and British people. But no, if she's coming, if she's coming, then there'll be something specific. And so I'm trying to do that.
How do you work the timing out? Because I know Indians in general speak really fast. So, I had this choice when I started teaching. I was still in graduate school, and the other, economics is full of international students who come to the US to get their graduate degree, right? So you have people, from the Caribbean, you have people from Europe, and they all have different accents. And a lot of my colleagues, they had a classroom accent, right? So demand would become demand. And they were doing it because, these are undergrad American kids. They're 18 years old. Maybe all of them have not had a chance to travel or, understand many accents. And this is a way of making the class more accessible, which I totally understand. And in my head, I was like, I can't do this. I can either think about the economics or I can think about the accent, because if I do both, I am just going to ruin it. So the only change I made to myself is to speak a little bit more slowly than I would to an Indian audience. So my classroom speed is a little bit slower, but I didn't really change anything else. And the students figured it out. Or maybe they just thought, oh, that's the crazy economics professor with a weird accent. And that was fine. But it's a really tough thing to do when so much of what you're saying relies on timing. I recently saw Zarna's stand-up on Amazon, like her set, the special on Amazon. And I find it incredibly funny on Instagram and other places. But something about the speed and the timing just felt off when it was for this supposed global audience, right? Like it was slower and it didn't quite work like as her usual quick-witted responses. And, she's just so naturally and spontaneously funny. So I was a bit disappointed. So how have you done that part of it?
Actually, and what you're talking about, oh my God. If you watch my Montreux set, actually, I am so criminally slow that I had written a 9-minute set for that show. And I finished the set was supposed to be 7 minutes. I finished only 5 minutes of it because I was talking so slowly during that time. One to Paila, as Indians, we just talk so fast over here that slowing down is just a little bit more, is just natural. I do think that we tend to belabor, and I think that's a very male way of talking, is to be like, sorry, I was thinking the other day that, it's so hot outside because we are going to have a cake party. And you're like, man, you didn't, that was too long. That was too long. It's so hot outside, should not have had a 5-minute gap between it's a heat party. You took too long.
Yeah.
It becomes belabored. I'm also constantly paranoid that people will stop listening. I get it all in there.
But you managed to say, my favorite thing about the Australia set is you say Bob's and Virgin. And that's the first time I realized that bad spellings on Twitter and Instagram DMs are a universal thing.
Yeah.
The perverts cannot spell. And it's not just the Indian pervert. Because all the girls are laughing. They're bad to the audience and all the girls are laughing. Because when you said it, I was so surprised. I was like, will they get it? And then they did get it because I was laughing so hard. So so clearly there is more universal experiences that we share in this digital age than we even realize.
Like one thing I'm thinking now, and I'm going to London. I was a bit in the next few weeks and I'm a little bit jittery about it. I'm like, I think I'm talking about the pandemic in India and my experience in the pandemic in India. And then I was like, but will it matter to them and all? I realized the more you zoom in on an experience, the more you examine the minutiae of an experience, like the more universal it becomes. Everybody in the audience may not have experienced the pandemic in India, but everybody definitely experienced loneliness. Everyone definitely felt that their sleep cycle was screwed. Everyone definitely had really freaking weird dreams. And I think that zooming in on that, hyper zooming in on the human experience, on your human experience, I think is the key to tapping in on the universal human experience.
So a couple of weird things you have to experience as a comic, right? So one of the timing things you've laid it out for me. The other thing I find interesting is the corporate gig, right? So I know that this is hugely lucrative, and during the pandemic it went on Zoom, which I know was just a tough gig for all you comics, but thank God you did it. You stayed afloat. Kudos to all of you. But what is the difference between the corporate gig and like just a regular audience in, one of the stand-up clubs or bars in Bombay or Delhi?
Completely different, because in a stand-up comedy club in Bombay or Delhi, you are there to be you, right? The audience is there to watch a funny person. In a corporate gig, it's, 50 people from HR who had first vetted you and made you paranoid about what you can and cannot say, right? They'll be like, "Nahin, nothing about religion, nothing about, politics,
Government.
nothing about government, nothing about jokes, nothing about, other jokes. In fact, you know what? Just stand there on stage for 40 minutes. That's literally the instruction they'll give you. I used to get a lot of like, don't talk about too many women's things, because also most corporate spaces are heavily male-sided.
Male.
Yeah. And so, and that's why March is my corporate month, where I'm like, they remember they have women in their company, and then I get hired to talk to them. But otherwise, it's mostly men first spaces. And then a lot of these corporate spaces are men first and men higher up in the food chain. And they like, so someone like Atul Khatri, I remember walking back, it's like 4 a.m. at the airport. And I realized I'm the only comic in the world that needs to leave. Like, I want all my flights to be out at 4 a.m. because I like early morning flights. I like to get into whichever city I am in. And I like to relax there before the show. I'm walking to the airport, Atul Khatri is coming back, with a $1 million smile on his face. I'm like, chalo yaar, how did it go? He's like, yaar, corporate show tha. So I said, okay, wow, that's great. So, how did it go? Standing ovation. And I realized, yeah, because, he is talking to, 55 to 60-year-old men about being a 55 to 60-year-old man. And that whole universal experience of like, nahi, mere bacche aise hai, meri beevi aisi hai. And, this is how I feel about XYZ. All those things are what corporate crowd will relate with very, very much. Whether it's Amit Tandon also, who's like a corporate gig. They are their demographic. You know what I'm saying? They are their demographic and they are minting money like anything in the world. And God bless them. God bless them. I like the one complaint that I usually get is that, no, you talk too much about sex. You talk too much about sex. And so,
more than Atul Khatri?
That's the thing. When it comes from Atul, it doesn't seem like sex. You know what I'm saying? That's the thing. But a 55-year-old man talking to other 55-year-old men about sex is an in-joke.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Whereas if I'm like, hey, by the way, guys, anyone eating any pussy lately, they'll all die. I mean, I'm not going to be at a corporate show asking about pussy. Though, oh my God, that'll be my dream come true.
When they put these things out, it's like there's the usual engineer joke, there is the usual HR joke, there is the usual commute joke, there is, of course, the leadership. It's one of the few spaces you can make fun of the boss. Right?
Also,
and
one way the dynamic, which I love this, it's a theory of laughter, is that, bosses laugh 88% more than their employees in any professional setting. 88%. And so,
calculated this, and how did they study
by the way,
this?
It's called the study of humor, and it's called genotology. The number one scientist of genotology is Mr. Robert Praveen, who has got, not Praveen, but like Provine. Okay. It's incredible. Actually, some of the theories around laugh, but one of them is this one. One of them is that bosses laugh.
No, but we've seen this in all our Bollywood movies, right? Like the Don will laugh and have a really quirky, weird laugh, and then all the, the followers exactly will start laughing after that. And then there'll be like a couple of stragglers, and the moment the Don stops laughing, everyone has to stop laughing. We've even seen this in Sholay. It's only when Gabbar finds it funny that, everyone's now relieved that he's toppling Russian roulette with the gun or whatever. The other couple of weird things I had a question about. So I've heard that temperature really matters for a stand-up comedy club and humor, right? So I've heard Jerry Seinfeld say this, that, if it's a little bit hotter, the audience laughs less. I'm like, India is just hot, hotter, hottest. So Do you actually see this play out that in a hotter room, temperature wise, people will laugh less or people get more uncomfortable? Do you see any correlation?
Yeah, so, we don't have the luxury of temperature. Yikes. Jerry Seinfeld, lucky guy. I do think that the two things that do affect, in terms of physical location, the two things that do affect our audience's reaction is temperature, of course, when it's either too hot or too cold. If an audience is not, if they're thinking about the temperature, they're not paying attention to your joke. And that is just no fun. The other thing I have realized is darkness. It's, when you have an audience in the dark, they are more likely to laugh than when you have them well lit. So whenever we do like shoots for stand up, I just did I did a show in Helsinki recently, it was a reality show called The World According to Comedians, and they flew us down to Finland to find out why Finland is the happiest country in the world. And it was actually a really cool show. And then as a sort of like, the season end of the show, we did a live show at Caroline on Broadway, and we're doing the show and it's going moderately. People are like, I was like, is it just Finnish people being serious yet again? But then I realized, no, the light is literally shining on the last person in the audience. It is just difficult for people to loosen up when they know that other people are watching them laugh. So I think I definitely think it's a light thing.
What about alcohol? Does alcohol consumption change the laughs? Because, a lot of these clubs also have like a minimum drink requirement. That's how they make money. And do you need is it better to have them like completely, I can imagine that the completely sober versus completely drunk extremes are not great. But what is the gradient for alcohol and humor? Laughter.
I'm depending on, I think for the average person, 1.5 drinks is the ideal like amount for like someone to really ease into a stand-up comedy show. 1.5 drinks is a magical number. Maybe I'm an alcoholic, so I'm like 1.5. But I'm sure for a lot of people, it's like, the first 10 sips and they're done. But it definitely has. It's fantastic when there's 1.5 drinks, because then you're ready to ease into it. You're ready to listen. You're also alert enough to listen and understand and follow. The worst is when people are too drunk. And that happens at like 10:30 shows and like late evening corporate shows, just late evening shows where people are so wasted and they've come like, just there, they talk too much to you. And you're like, man, I've got the mic here, this ain't about you. But alcohol, 1 to 1.5 drinks is my recommended amount.
What's your way of dealing with heckling? First up, do you get heckled a lot? Because I have never seen you live. I've only seen videos, right? We've never been in the same city at the same time. So that's one thing I have to fix at some point. But I have never, on the videos, I'm guessing the heckling, if it happens, gets cut out. So what's the heckling ratio for you versus others, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah, I don't think I get heckled a lot more than people. I think I think I get heckled a decent amount. And I think it's because I also talk to the audience. I also talk to the audience a lot. I'm like, so how's it going? And, how are you feeling? And sometimes when you're talking to people, a bunch of other people will jump in and try to hijack the conversation. And you have to know to shut them up. I think now I have the authority. I have the personal authority in my chest where I know that people have come to watch me. Like they've paid money to watch me. And so I can with confidence be like, hey, listen, man, this is not about you. I'm so sorry. Like I promise you, as soon as the show ends, we'll go out and we'll, whatever you want to say, I'll listen to you. But right now, let me go. I think it's also the idea. The thing is, when you start off with stand-up, you think that it is a very adversarial art. And maybe in India, it is still very adversarial. It's very like, insult and come back and, comedian destroys heckler and all. I feel like there is also a large part, because stand-up is still relatively a new art form, is that a large part of people just are curious about what stand-up is. And if you really think about it, they've paid money, they've bought somebody they really like, they've bought the car, they parked the car outside, the kids have a babysitter at home or the grandparents are watching, whatever. Yeah. People have made an effort to come and watch you.
Yeah.
Right? So they actually don't want you to fail. they actually want you to do well because that's what they have invested
Yeah.
in for that day, emotionally, monetarily, time-wise. They have actually like invested in you being good. And so I find that to me gives me a lot of solace. It makes me realize that the audience is on my side. Every time I'm on stage, they want me to do well. I just have to meet their expectations. And, touch wood, as I do this more and more, I will, the ratio of me meeting the expectations will go, higher and higher up.
So I feel like we complimented you too much through the show and like just praised you too much. So I want at least one story from you on like the worst bombing
Oh my God.
ever, and sort of how long it took you to go through that process before you felt like, oh, I can do this. Even if I bomb, I can do this.
Oh, Miss, so you know what? I bomb about, and I don't know if any other comedian. Okay, I'm worried about admitting how much I bomb because then it'll become a thing. I don't think Indians understand. I think I think right now my bomb ratio is 17%. And that's actually maybe a realistic one. In fact, I think so the 2, 3 I can tell you happily about. Okay. One was when I had just started doing stand up and this was at the Comedy Store, had just opened. And I really, really wanted to be able to perform for them because they were bringing all these comics from, around the world down. And, and I was like, oh my God, it would just be such an honor to, hang out in the green room with these people and, get to talk with them. So I go in for the audition. I nailed the audition. The audition was in the middle of the afternoon somewhere. I nailed the audition. I walk out of the audition with the confidence of 1,000 angels. As I'm walking out, I get a call from the Comedy Store. It's Don Ward, and he's like, good job today. Listen, we have a show for the Beep organization. Just to specify, these are like overachievers whose companies have a turnover of more than 200 crore, a year, and they are under 45. They're having a corporate show tonight. And so, there are these 3 comics from the UK performing for them. Would you like to come and do an opening act? I was like, I'll be there, yo. So I get in there. I remember the show started. They put one act on first. Then they said, you can go after this act. So I go after that. As soon as I walk on, there's a gentleman in the front row wearing a Hawaiian shirt. And, this is a lesson that if anyone who's an aspiring comic, if you're listening, use your time on stage to shine yourself. Don't bother about the Hawaiian shirt on that guy in the front row. This is just life advice from me. I walk in, I'm like, listen, nice Hawaiian shirt. And it's an older gentleman. He's my father's age. He's my father's age. And he looks at me and he goes, joke bolna. I cannot tell you what happened after that because I have locked it up. But I know that I basically sort of moonwalked backward out of that stage. And I didn't get called from the Comedy Store for another year. Whether I went back and I re-auditioned and, then they put me through the process all over again. That was an exciting bomb. The other one just happened recently. In fact, I was at a corporate show somewhere in Goa. And dude, when I walked in, it was like, chill, this, that, and the other. And I was really excited because oh my God, the crowd likes me already. And then I finished the show and then I walked up and people were like, and I was like, how did I already have you on my side when I walked in and then completely lose you while I was actually doing my act. Then I walked out and then...
Do you know when it's happening? Do you feel it when it's happening and you're just trying to hold on or you only realize it?
Okay. Of course, So it's like, when so sometimes you make a joke to the wrong person in the audience, right? So apparently I made a joke to one of the clients, which I should not have.
Okay.
And then, or another time it's where what you planned doesn't. So I know, I went to there and I had a bunch of jokes about kids these days because I figured they're all older men, right? So they'll have, all of them have kids. And so I'll do a bit about it's expensive to have kids these days. I can tell you that even as a single woman because I don't want to have kids because it's expensive. And so I'm doing this bit and suddenly they're all like one of them losing me. I can tell because he gets on his phone. I was like, oh, really? Well, are you calling your wife to stop that pregnancy? And what's happening? No. And that's when the CEO is looking at me like I murdered somebody. And I'm like, what? What did I do? And then I realized that's one of their clients. And so I was like, oh, I lost them at that point in time. I was like, cool. And then I walked.
And is it just like you got to do this one day at a time and this is just part of the deal? Or do you get better at either not bombing or having like tricks in your back pocket when things aren't going quite your way and you know how to get it under control?
So, I mean, tricks and tips, of course, it's a function of just doing this long enough. I also think that, it does not get easier, but you just get better prepared. You just are more prepared.
Yeah.
And because every show is new. Every show is a different one. Every show is a brand new one. And you have to sort of fly by the seat of your pants in every single one. And that's kind of what I love about this job, actually, is that it keeps me really humble. Yeah. Like, I really don't think, I don't think I could become God tomorrow and just be like, no, you guys, I'm God. But like, am I? I will start, even my prayer will be like with a self-effacing joke up top. Like, it'll just be like, hey, I'm God, if you guys want to call me that, but you can also call me.
I'm sure someone will be like, yeah, but she's not the funny God. That one has four hands.
Of course.
Yeah, no, this is great, but I've loved everything that you've done. It's so awesome. And it's like a little piece of...
This conversation got too serious, I feel.
Yeah, but I am not a stand-up comic and most of my audience is not waiting for laughs every 10 seconds, right?
Maybe I'm just paranoid.
And I am very impressed with myself that I don't just keep laughing every time I see your face, because when I see you, I just think of all the funny things you've said.
Damn straight. You will be depressed after this, promise me. I'm about to bum you out.
No, this was a pleasure. Did you have...
I did. I'm confused. I hope I gave you what you wanted.
You are fantastic.
Yeah.
You gave us a piece of yourself and that's all we need.
Thank you.
Ideas of India is produced by the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Help us grow by giving us a rating and leaving a review. Follow us on Twitter at @Rajagopalan and at Ideas of India. Also check out our initiative commemorating 30 years of India's market reforms at the 1991project.com.